From KUOW 94.9 Seattle, I'm Ross Reynolds. Charitable giving dropped about 35% last year, according to one recent study. Has your charitable giving dropped because you weren't able to afford to give? Have you figured out other ways to help?
Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
Today we're going to talk to an expert on the state of charitable giving in 2010, and we'd like to hear from you. How do you decide where to give? I'm at 206-543-5869. That's 206-543-KUOW. How do you decide how much to give? 800-289-5869. How do you check out the charities that you give to? And do you do something other than write a check? Tell us about that. You can write to us, conversation at KUOW.org. Here's what we heard from you earlier today.
Even though money is thin the last year or two, we continue to make whatever donations we can to environmentally oriented organizations, and especially organizations that are getting the message out that toxic elements in our environment, like pesticides, etc., are really bad for human health.
At our Facebook page, Dennis wrote, our political donations are up. Our charitable giving may be down slightly as a result, but goodwill-type donations are definitely up. And Maria wrote, so far, we've been able to continue the amount we've given in past years, but always wishing we could do more. 206-543-5869. It's known as the giving season, and as we approach it, tell us how your giving goes, how you decide who to give to, how you decide how much to give. 800-289-5869. Write to us, conversation at KUOW.org. Doug White directs the George H. Heyman Center for Philanthropy and Fundraising at New York University, and his books include Charity on Trial, What You Need to Know Before You Give. Doug White started the website Charity Navigator, which provides background information on charities to help guide giving. Doug, thanks for joining us.
It is my pleasure, Ross. It's good to be with you.
Maybe you've got questions about how to give, how to check out charities. You can give us a call, 206-543-5869. That's 206-543-KUOW. Doug, how do you decide how to give and how much to give and where to give?
Well, the first thing I think I look at, and I think most people do, and that is to see where their heart lies. It's important to know what you are emotionally connected to. As I heard you just say a moment ago, one of your callers earlier today said she wants to maintain her giving to the environment. Well, clearly that's very important to her. So that's the very first thing anybody should take into account. And no matter what anybody's financial statement says, you're going to support that organization that you feel most comfortable with. But that said, over the last decade, last 5 years, last 10 years, a lot of organizations have become very aware of other issues, that is to say their own financial transparency and the ability they can have toward getting the message out about their own fiscal responsibility. And over the last several years, we've seen a lot of organizations that just haven't met that standard, and people are starting to get aware of that. So that is the other side of the coin. People should be very aware of not only how effective their dollars will be used, but also how much goes into their overhead and how much does go into programming.
Doug, how has the recession affected charitable giving?
It's been, as you can imagine, quite poor. Last year was a tremendously bad year. This year, it's funny because a study came out this past week, and there are two sets of headlines. One says the worst may be over, and the other one said it still looks dire. And so it's the same set of data. What we're seeing, I think, is a lot of people being much more cautious than they were because they don't know what lies ahead, and they're a lot less optimistic than they were, and yet they're still being pulled by that emotional heartstring I mentioned a moment ago. And so as a result, a lot of people who have an extra amount of income, whether it's just a few dollars or whether it's several thousand or whether it's a couple million, people are trying to find ways to support the causes that are closest to them. So it's a mixed bag right now. As of the first 9 months of 2010, we're at about where we were a little bit last year, where people are holding back a little bit, but still trying to be as optimistic as they can possibly be.
Doug, do we know if charitable giving has moved from one direction to another? Are people giving to different causes, maybe also because of the recession?
Yes. you're finding a lot of, for example, arts organizations are hurting tremendously over what they were a few years ago. Because, and I think this is because people feel that there is less need, if you will, at an organization like a museum. That's not necessarily true, and I'm not making that judgment. But I think that, but it is true that arts organizations have seen a pretty big drop over the last year or two. But also, ironically, at the same time, you have organizations like the homeless shelters that are getting hit hard too, and so we're finding a lot of trends that are almost contradictory, but you're seeing a lot of organizations becoming much more creative in trying to reach out to their donors. But right now, I think there are some segments, international organizations and the arts organizations and some others that have been hit pretty hard this past couple of years.
If you just joined us, we're talking about charitable giving, and I'm asking you to call us and tell us what your philosophy is on it. How do you decide who to give to, and how do you check them out? How do you decide how much to give? It's 206-543-5869. And Doug White, who's with me today, his books include Charity on Trial, What You Need to Know Before You Give, might have some advice for you if you're beginning to go into this area, or maybe you've been giving for some time and you want to kind of double check and make sure you're doing the right thing. It's 800-289-5869, or write to us, conversation@KUOW.org. Doug, when there are natural disasters, there's a lot of fundraising that goes on. And does that direct charitable giving away from some of the organizations that aren't necessarily dealing with disaster relief, or is that just additional money that's donated to charity?
It does take away from some of your more traditional charities, but a lot of that is, Ross, additional money, and it's emotional money, and that's how I characterize it, because it also tends not to be long-standing kinds of donations that continue. You have a lot of people who respond to headlines. I mean, right after Haiti last year, you had the texting ability to donate small amounts of money, and the Red Cross raised millions and millions of dollars that way from people that otherwise were not donating their money. Now, the good part of that is that this is the first experience they're having doing that, and so they're being introduced to that process. But for the most part, when you have a disaster, you'll see a lot of the American can-do charitable spirit come out saying, I want to help, and that is just wonderful. But that kind of help doesn't tend to be sustained, and so it peaks and then it drops rather precipitously quickly after that. And if I might, just
Sure.
One other point on that issue is that after these kinds of events take place, a lot of faux charities seem to pop up.
Oh, yeah.
This is where I think donors and your listeners need to really be aware. It's not that you have to give every dime you give to the Red Cross or anything like that, but you really need to be sure that the organization to which you're giving money is a legitimate organization. Because after 9/11, there were about 4,000 charities or organizations that advertised themselves as charities that were fraudulent.
The conventional wisdom is for that exact reason, Doug. Don't give to organizations you haven't heard of or that haven't been around for a while. But is the philanthropic community a self-cleansing area? Just because an organization has been around for a while, does that mean it's on the up and up?
No, not at all. The United Way, if you'll recall, back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, one of the most famous organizations and large organizations in the world was filled with bad practices and fraud from the chief executive officer. So that fact alone, and the Red Cross itself after 9/11 and after Katrina had its own issues. So the fact that it is well known and highly regarded is not the only thing that should make someone comfortable. You really have to know the organization, and you have to talk to people there and really get a sense of where they're coming from. So that takes you go to the other end of the spectrum, and the new guys in town, they really have a tough road to hoe, and you really have to be on your toes to make sure that your money is going to go where you want it to go.
You mentioned the importance of talking to the folks that you'll be giving to. Mary writes to us at conversation@KUOW.org. I go to an alternative gift fair. There's one coming up in Woodinville this coming Saturday at North Shore UCC. I can talk personally with staffers from 20 different nonprofits, hear personally exactly what they do and what just a few dollars will do for others. And they tell me up to the minute exactly how the economy has hit their clients. It makes me feel that the holiday is meaningful and not commercialized. So a way to actually go out and meet the folks who you're going to be contributing to and ask those kind of direct questions